So, have you ever looked at someone who's just brilliant? I mean, off the chart smart, and seen them make a life decision that was just terrible? Well, we're going to dive into a pretty radical idea today that your ability to manage your emotions might actually be a much better predictor of success than your IQ. You know, this isn't exactly a new idea. More than 2,000 years ago, Aristotle basically nailed this fundamental human challenge. It is so easy to feel something, but it's incredibly hard to master it, right? And that ancient wisdom brings us right to a huge modern-day question. I mean, we've all seen it. A person who is a certified genius makes a decision that is just completely baffling, totally self-destructive. And this whole paradox is perfectly captured in a pretty shocking true story. Okay, let's take a look at a case where a sky-high IQ led to a decision that was, frankly, terrifyingly dumb. So, I want you to meet Jason. By every single academic measure, this kid was an absolute star. A genius with a laser-like focus on one thing: getting into Harvard Medical School. But then, one single grade, a B on a physics quiz, well, that's what triggered a catastrophic chain of events. For Jason, this wasn't just a score on a piece of paper. He saw it as the complete and total collapse of his entire future. In just a moment of uncontrolled rage and absolute panic, this brilliant student did something horrifying. And it really just begs the question, how could someone so academically smart act so catastrophically irrational? Well, to get that, we have to look at this fundamental conflict that's happening inside all of our brains. You see, our brains are in this constant tug of war between what we think and what we feel. It's this epic battle between logic and passion that plays out inside our heads every single day. So on one side, you've got the rational mind. That's the part that plans for Harvard and understands physics. That's our neocortex. But on the other side, we have this ancient, powerful, emotional mind, and it's designed for pure survival. And here's the kicker. Sometimes that emotional mind completely takes over in what's called an emotional hijacking. And this happens in a flash. The amygdala, which is basically our brain's emotional smoke detector, declares a full-blown emergency. It completely bypasses our rational thought. It's the reason we sometimes do something and then kind of step back and think, whoa, what on earth just came over me? Now, here's the key thing to get. Our emotional reaction often happens before our reason can even catch up. For Jason, that bad grade was perceived by his emotional brain as a life or death threat, and it acted just like it was. So the secret to stopping these hijackings, to bridging that gap between feeling and thinking, is something called emotional intelligence. So let's move on and see how this all builds into the core parts of emotional intelligence. I mean, what does it actually mean to be emotionally smart? It really just boils down to two main areas. First, understanding yourself, and second, understanding others. It all starts with being aware of your own feelings as they're happening, and learning to manage them, and then using that same awareness to really connect with the people around you. There's this fantastic old story about a pretty aggressive samurai. He storms up to his Zen master and demands, "Hey, teach me about heaven and hell, right now." The master just looks at him and calmly insults him, calling him a lout. And bam, in that single moment, the whole lesson is right there. The samurai's sudden awakening to his own rage, that shift from being his anger to observing his anger, that is the very essence of self-awareness. It's the absolute foundation of emotional intelligence. All right, now for self-management. There was this famous experiment at Stanford that put this very simple test to a group of 4-year-olds. And what they found? Well, it turned out to be a stunningly powerful predictor of their entire future success. I mean, the results were just astounding. The kids who could delay that gratification, they grew into teenagers who are way more confident, more dependable, and handled stress better. It just proves that the ability to manage an impulse isn't just about marshmallows. It's this foundational skill that lets us set goals and actually work towards them. It's a cornerstone of what psychologists call our executive function. So, how does all this stack up against traditional intelligence in the real world? Which one is actually a better predictor of a successful, happy life? Okay, so let's look at how this plays out in personality. As you can see, when you compare them, the high IQ profile is kind of what you'd expect. Intellectually driven, but often a bit anxious or critical. But now look at the high EQ profile. It adds all the qualities that build stronger relationships and make us more resilient, being socially poised, caring, and adapting well to stress. Now, here's a number that might just blow your mind. 80%. What if I told you that number represents how much of your success in life is determined by factors other than your IQ? So the takeaway here is clear. Raw intelligence, your IQ, it's just not enough. Think of it like this. Your IQ might be the entry ticket, but your EQ, that's the master aptitude. That's the engine that's going to determine how far you actually go. And all of this leads us to the most powerful and, honestly, the most hopeful part of this entire idea. If EQ is so darn important, is there anything we can actually do about it? The good news is, unlike our IQ, which stays relatively fixed throughout our lives, our emotional skills are not set in stone. The habits of mind and heart that make up emotional intelligence, they can actually be changed. And this is the real power of emotional intelligence. We can actively get better at our self-awareness. We can learn to manage our impulses better. We can learn to be more empathetic. It's a skill, and just like any other muscle, it can get stronger with practice. And that's really the final crucial question to think about. We spend decades, literally decades, meticulously educating the rational mind. But our emotional education, it's often just left entirely to chance. And that really highlights the urgent need for an education of the heart, not just for our kids, but for all of us. Trauma. We're going to look at how terrifying moments can literally leave a scar on the brain. But more importantly, we're going to uncover the incredible science of how we heal and how we can actually relearn our emotional responses.
To really get this, let's start with this powerful account from a Vietnam veteran. We're talking more than 2 decades after the war, and a simple thunderstorm, the sound of it, hijacks his senses. It plunges him right back into the terror of the battlefield. It's like time just collapses, and the past isn't the past. It's happening right now.
In this experience, it just raises this huge fundamental question. What is going on inside our brains that allows a memory to be so powerful, so vivid, that it can just completely overwhelm our reality, even decades later? You know, to understand how to heal, we first have to understand the wound itself. So let's start there. Let's look at what happens when a traumatic event doesn't just fade into memory, but instead it carves a deep, lasting scar on our minds. Our story really begins here at Cleveland Elementary School. On what should have been a totally normal day, a gunman turned a playground into a scene of just unimaginable horror. For the young kids who survived, those 7 minutes of terror would echo for years and years. In the weeks and months that followed, something really disturbing started happening on that same playground. The children started playing this game where they would reenact the shooting. Now, this wasn't just kids being morbid. It was their mind's desperate attempt to process what happened, to try and get some kind of control over a moment where they were completely and utterly helpless. And what these children were going through, the constant jumpiness at loud noises, avoiding the playground, the memories that just pop up out of nowhere, these are all the classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. It's a condition where the emotional part of the brain gets stuck on high alert, and it just can't seem to get the message that the danger is over. So what is actually happening inside our heads to create this state of like a perpetual emergency? Let's get into the biology of this hair trigger response. At the very heart of PTSD is something called a neural hijacking. Basically, the amygdala, which is our brain's emotional alarm system, it just takes over. It reacts to anything that even vaguely reminds it of the original trauma before our rational thinking brain even has a chance to step in and say, hey, wait a minute, we're safe. See, our brains have these 2 pathways for fear. The high road is the slow, thoughtful one, but the low road is a super fast, reflexive shortcut designed to save our lives. In trauma, that low road becomes this hypersensitive hair trigger. It starts firing off alarms for anything, a car backfiring, a door slamming, no questions asked. And here is the absolute key point. It's not just stress that rewires the brain, it's uncontrollable stress. I mean, they did these studies on rats where some could do something to stop an electric shock, and others were completely helpless. Both groups got the exact same amount of shock, but the helpless rats were the ones who suffered profound biological damage. It's that feeling of powerlessness that really does the harm. This helps explain why trauma caused by other people is often so much more devastating than, say, a natural disaster. An earthquake is terrifying for sure, but it's impersonal. But a violent act? That shatters our fundamental belief that we are safe with other people. It teaches us that the social world itself can be dangerous. Okay, I know this all sounds pretty bleak, but here's the hopeful part, the really hopeful part. While those memories might be branded into our brain's circuitry, our reactions to them are not set in stone. The brain can be re-educated. Healing from trauma is all about teaching the thinking part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, to act like an air traffic controller. It learns to see those false alarms from the amygdala and send a calming signal down, basically saying, hey, it's okay, the danger isn't real, that's just a memory. And that right there is the heart of emotional relearning. And there's actually a roadmap for this journey, outlined by Dr. Judith Herman. First, you have to regain a sense of safety and control in your own life. Then, from that place of safety, the story of the trauma can be revisited and mourned. And finally, that process allows for a reconnection to a normal life, one that isn't completely dominated by the past. Now, this amazing capacity for the brain to change and relearn, it's not just for healing from severe trauma. It also applies to the emotional habits we're born with, what scientists call our temperament. There's this groundbreaking research from psychologist Jerome Kagan, and it shows that right from birth, some of us are just wired to be timid, with a very easily excited amygdala, while others are wired to be bold, with a much higher threshold for that alarm. And this isn't a choice, it's just our innate neurochemistry. But here's the powerful part. Temperament is not destiny. Kagan's work found that the right kind of parenting, one that doesn't just shield a timid child from everything, but instead applies some gentle pressure to face small challenges, can actually help that child learn to manage their fear. These experiences literally build and strengthen the neural pathways between their thinking brain and their emotional brain. It's incredible. So, if our emotional brains are so malleable, so shapeable, especially when we're young, well, it forces us to step back and ask a much bigger question. What are we doing as a society to help shape them? I mean, if you look at the data from the late 20th century, the trends are, well, they're deeply concerning. In just 2 decades, the teen suicide rate tripled. Juvenile arrests for violent crimes hit an all-time high. These aren't just numbers on a chart, they're signs of a huge crisis in the emotional well-being of our kids. And it's not just the extreme cases. A huge national survey of children showed a steady decline across the board. On average, kids were becoming more anxious, more aggressive, more withdrawn, having more trouble just paying attention. It really points to a growing emotional illiteracy. And the cost of this illiteracy is massive. You can draw a direct line from specific emotional deficits, like not being able to read social cues or not knowing how to handle feeling distressed, to some of the most devastating problems young people face. We're talking about everything from delinquency and depression to dropping out of school and addiction. This really suggests that maybe we've been tackling this all wrong. Launching separate wars on drugs or violence, it's like sending an ambulance after the crash instead of teaching people how to drive. The real solution might be a preventive one. What if we taught the core skills of emotional intelligence right in our schools as a fundamental part of education? And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We all accept without question that schools have to teach reading, writing, and math. But given everything we now know about how the brain develops and how absolutely crucial emotional skills are for a healthy life, maybe it's time we ask, shouldn't schooling the emotions be just as essential?